Well, hello, folks out there in YouTube land. Got a big show lined up for you. Let's get right on into it. All right, horns down, a penalty. Say it ain't so.
You can't be serious, man. You cannot be serious!
Oh my, we've been talking about this horns down crap ever since Texas was announced that they were going to be joining the SEC. It is a big deal for the Texas folks. They don't like people doing the horns down sign. It upsets them greatly. It was a penalty in their conference. Now they're moving into the SEC. There is a desire for a percentage of Texas people, not all, a very loud minority. They want it to be a penalty in the SEC so nobody can do horns down towards the Texas Longhorns. We're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about FSU and Clemson, what's going on with them. I thought we might see an announcement from the SEC. It doesn't appear that's the case. They're obviously in limbo. They're trying to get out of the ACC. We're going to talk about all of that and what brought us here. And it's messy. Now, I'm going to have a lot of opinions in this video. And if you're somebody that's super sensitive, sometimes I have to say this up front. If you're somebody that gets all bent out of shape, you might want to just, well, actually, humongous, tell them.
Just walk away.
Yeah, it might be best for you to walk away because I'm going to be very opinionated on some of this. So anyway, for the rest of you that can handle it, that don't have to walk around with a participation trophy, let's get into this. Now, this first thing about horns down, it's everywhere. I mean, there must be 20 articles out about this today. I was reading this morning, kind of researching and looking into the SEC, trying to prepare for a show, and I mean, everything is about horns down. And this actually was in The Athletic. It says, is horns down a penalty in the SEC? It's about context. It says coordinator of officials. And there's your horns down sign. It says SEC coordinator official John McDade. He's well-versed in horns down. He's heard a lot about it. Said, so is horns down a penalty in the SEC? Yes and no. It's all about context. And McDade expects he'll continue to be asked about it. He said, I know it's a passionate topic. He said, I don't have any issue with it being asked. The only thing that takes me back is how often I'm asked the question. But I get it. The game is emotion and passion. That's what makes it so darn fun. As an officiating unit, we need to deal with that. And pretty much my understanding is this. You can do horns down as long as it doesn't upset the Texas Longhorn folks. For example, you wouldn't want to go and do horns down in their face right after, like, you maybe tackled the guy. Now, which is understandable. Look, that's taunting. I totally get that. But if you do it on the sidelines, that may not be a penalty. If the fan base in the crowds does it, I don't think that'll be a penalty. I don't believe that. Now, things could change. I don't know. I want to talk to the Texas folks a little bit. Now, y'all are brand new in the SEC. I've been here about my whole life. All right, I played in the SEC. I was captain of the University of Tennessee golf team. I know a lot about the SEC, to say the least. I was back there in the 80s. You're brand new, okay? Just so there's no misunderstanding. You've already, now not all of you, it's a minority, but it's a very loud minority, and it's not a tiny minority. I've been doing this channel for a couple of years. I've got a pretty good feel on this, and I've been in the comment section a lot talking to Texas folks. It's probably 10 or 15% of your crowd, maybe a little less. But they're super loud. And they've already come in and said they're going to dominate the SEC, you know, daddy's coming home and all that kind of stuff. And they've let everybody know, hey, there's a new sheriff in town. And there's going to be some butt kicking going on. And you might as well get used to it. That right there is not a good way to come into the SEC. Right off the start, folks don't like that. Now, I have been warned by the Texas A&M Aggies and the Oklahoma Sooners that this is exactly what you should expect. That Texas is a different brand, and they're very, very, shall I say, arrogant. And again, most of the Texas folks I've dealt with haven't been that bad, but I've dealt with some that are. Now we have to worry about the horns down being a penalty. I just almost can't indicate to you enough how much you're going to see horns down. SEC crowds, they love to know that bothers you. They live for that kind of crap. You're going to see horns down every place you go on the road. It's going to be massive. And especially now that there's talk that it'll be a penalty if they dare do it, is really going to get people rolling. Now, the Gators, for example, they've got the chomp, okay? And a lot of people chomp against them, especially the last few years, because they've been losing a lot. And I'm sorry to have to tell the Florida Gators that, but it's true. Okay, maybe I'm not that sorry. But there's not a penalty if you do the chomp, okay? The crowds do it all the time. It just kind of is what it is. And the Florida Gators have dealt with it, and you don't see them screaming for penalties. They're not going to do that. So I don't know how this is going to play out this year, but for the Texas folks, go ahead and fully expect every time you go on the road, you're going to see horns down on a level you've never seen in your life. It's going to happen. You might want to rethink a little bit of how you introduce yourself in the SEC, because so far you've not gotten off to a very good start. I'm just going to be very blunt with you. You kind of messed this up. You might want to take a cue from the Oklahoma Sooners. They've been pretty cool about it. I've dealt with them in the comments section back and forth, a lot of them. They're going into this. They're like, hey, we're a good quality team. We know the SEC is really tough. We'll see how we do. We're expecting to have success, but we don't know for sure. And that's pretty much how the Sooners have been. They've been fine. Texas folks, not so much. So we'll see how this plays out. But this is going to be very controversial. The first time somebody gets called for a penalty on horns down, unless it's just blatantly taunting somebody, there's going to be all kinds of problems. I can just go ahead and tell you. Expect a full blow up. You don't dominate the SEC like you did your previous conference. You're not going to waltz in here and just get what you want. Those days are over. Yeah, you're going to get a lot more money. You ought to be happy about that. And your competition level is going to jump dramatically. But if you think you're going to dominate the SEC and be in control and dictate what the penalties are going to be and rules, you got another thing coming. You're living in la-la land. So anyway, I did want to talk about that, and I told you I was going to be opinionated. And some of you Texas folks are going to be in comments saying, I'm not talking about all of you. I'm talking about the very loud minority that is trying to dictate. It's not going to happen. Now we need to talk about Florida State and Clemson. I was expecting we'd hear something in the SEC media days today, kind of like we did with Oklahoma and Texas, especially after Josh Pate came out and said that he'd heard from some legal folks that aren't actually in sports, that just pretty much are lawyers, et cetera, it sounds like, that there would be an announcement, or most likely be an announcement this month. You would expect that SEC media days would be when it comes. That has not been the case so far. And this is actually what Greg Sankey said about the ACC and the SEC and bringing on additional teams.
Yeah, I think I got it. So the question is, how closely do I monitor what's happening in the ACC?
Yes.
And then what are the implications? I pay attention. As I said, we're focused on our 16. I've said before at media days, I'm not a recruiter. My job is to make sure we meet the standard of excellence that we have for ourselves on a daily basis. That attracts interest. It's done that with the 2 universities that we've added this year. They're not the only phone calls I've ever had, but I'm not involved in recruitment. Our presidents have been clear that I am not going to entangle us in litigation around expansion. And so I pay attention, but I'm not engaged in those conversations. In fact, as I understand, the issue is agreements have been signed and decisions have been made among a conference, and the question is, are those going to be honored as they were established? And apparently that's for a court to decide now. The broader implications, obviously, if things change, then there's a new level of uncertainty. It already creates speculation that I think is counterproductive, but I don't spend an enormous amount of my time thinking about it. I certainly don't spend any time engaged in that recruiting activity because we're focused on our 16, and I want to be respectful of the difficulty that's currently faced with that issue, that set of issues within the ACC, and my colleague Jim Phillips.
All right, so it sounds like nothing's coming from the SEC media days about FSU and Clemson and the whole ACC situation. Now, this thing happened really fast. A lot of this has to do with the Pac-12 dissolving and all of that, and a lot of teams being added. And, of course, Texas and Oklahoma coming into the SEC. That got a lot of conferences worried because they were like, oh, crap, if the SEC starts picking and choosing what they want, that could be a problem. And a few years ago, an alliance was formed. And the alliance has kind of become the butt of jokes, this guy being one that has enjoyed those and spread a couple. But that was in an effort to try to block the SEC because there was some fear about that. It didn't work out so good, obviously. A couple of the commissioners that were part of that alliance are not even there anymore, but Commissioner Phillips is. And a lot of you may not know what the alliance actually is, so I'm going to give you a little background on this, and I'll do it quickly. And this is actually from an article a few years ago, so this actually is kind of interesting to hear about it. And it's the Alliance Explained, which is the ACC, Big Ten, and Pac-12 back in the day. And they actually announced this on video, this was years ago, between 3 of the 5 most powerful conferences in college athletics. And it had to do with the ever-growing SEC and the weakened Big 12. And the Alliance actually is what stopped the college football playoff from going to a 12-team playoff last year instead of the 4-team that it actually wound up being. And this played a huge role in the speed of the desire of Florida State to get out of the ACC. And it was actually a vote of 8-3, and the 3 conferences that voted against it, it had to be unanimous. The ACC, Big Ten, and Pac-12, it turned out they were the dissenters. They had voted against it. Now, had we had a 12-team playoff, which is what was supposed to happen, Florida State would have been in that playoff. They would have been number 5. They would have had home field advantage. They would have played number 12. And we would not have had the absolute uproar that occurred down at Florida State. They were 13-0, had a perfect record, won their conference championship, but because they lost their quarterback in the 11th or 12th game, the college football playoff used that as a reason to keep them out and allowed 2 teams with 1 loss each, which was Texas and Alabama, into the college football playoff, one of which was an SEC participant. The other one is going into the SEC this year. So obviously Greg Sankey, ESPN, played a major role in that, and that's what everybody believes, which is a reasonable assumption. And the ACC with Jim Phillips, he worded some little do-nothing letter. We should have had this and blah, blah. It was nothing. It didn't satisfy Florida State, to say the least. And there was a pretty quick reaction after that. Board of Regents voted that they were going to sue the ACC. They were going to look into the College Football Playoff Committee. There was even $1 million set aside in Florida by the governor to possibly sue the committee. And this really got the ball rolling. Now, part of this has to do with the fact the ACC has a very long-term TV rights deal that's weak. And they are not going to make a ton of money. And the SEC and Big Ten are getting richer and richer. And this shows the total money per conferences. Big Ten and SEC getting rich. Big 12 and ACC falling behind $25, $30 million a year. And when it was time for the SEC and Big Ten to push their weight around, they made sure they got double the money for the college football playoff compared to the other 2 conferences.
Woo! 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 Ow! Love that money.
So not only did Florida State get screwed out of the playoff, now they're looking at a $30 million shortfall every year for the next, dozen plus years because they're in this long-term contract that was signed several years back. And this is just absolutely pissed off the Florida State folks to no end, and rightfully so. They realize they're in a bad situation. Now, granted, the decision to go into the ACC was, in hindsight, not a good one. At the time, it made sense because it was an easier route to a national title. And because we didn't have an actual playoff, which we should have for the last 30 years, decisions were made that weren't best. So now the chickens have come home to roost, to say the least. And I believe FSU and Clemson are going to be kind of in a no man's land. What they're going to probably have to do is get out of the ACC. They've got lawsuit after lawsuit. They're in 3 different states, and somehow get out of it. If they can get out of the conference and become either independent or possibly join a conference without long-term tentacles, then they can pretty much do what they want. I think that might be the plan at this point. I was thinking they were going to join the SEC. That's what it felt like to me, and a lot of people thought that. Many other people thought they would join the Big Ten. I've not felt that way because of AAU, which very quickly is the Association of American Universities. The AAU is a highly selective membership organization of preeminent public and private research universities.
Well, Lottie frickin' da!
Basically, they're the sort of big dog scholastically within the universities. And right now, the Big Ten only has 1 team that's a member that's not an AAU member, and that's Nebraska, who when they joined were. And they recently lost that accreditation, which they're taking a lot of grief over, to say the least. So the Big Ten, in my opinion, because of that, makes them a less viable option, even though I'm sure the Big Ten would long-term like to be in Florida and South Carolina. They want to be in the South. But this alliance that stopped the playoff, had there been a playoff this year, I don't think there'd be lawsuits right now. Now, they may have come later on, but the animosity and anger and speed of this has a lot to do with them getting screwed out of the playoff. And the Alliance, which I actually have a little video of the Alliance in one of their meetings.
Your brains need development.
Yeah, that's how I see them personally. So anyway. So what's going to happen with Florida State and Clemson? Right now, I don't have a good idea. There's been talk of them going to the Big 12. Makes no sense whatsoever. It's the same financial situation they're in right now. They're out of the frying pan into the fire, and they're going to have to pay some sort of exit fee that's going to be exorbitant because they've got this thing set up with the TV rights and all that to where the penalties are absurd. They're like $500 million. It's ridiculous. So going to the Big 12 makes zero sense. The only thing they can do now, if they're not going to join the Big 10 or SEC, is to go independent or stay where they're at. So we'll see how this goes. I would assume what they're going to do at this point is continue to fight to get out of the ACC, and if they can get some sort of negotiated settlement or they get a decision in their favor, then they can walk away relatively scathed or unscathed and be independent and then free themselves of this nightmare 12 to 15 year TV rights deal and get back in the game. This would obviously devastate the ACC. They are the two big dogs in that conference. Losing Clemson and FSU would be devastating to the ACC. They would become a second-tier conference, which is going to almost certainly force North Carolina, Virginia, other teams to want to exit as well, because you know the TV rights are going to be renegotiated at a lower level. So then they're even further behind. And the Big Ten and the SEC would love to get their hands on North Carolina or Virginia because of those fresh markets that they're not in. And both join those two conferences geographically, which would be a nice change for the Big Ten since they're grabbing people from out on the West Coast, which doesn't make a lot of sense. And the ACC has grabbed 3 teams from the West Coast as well, or at least 2 of them, because they're trying to offset the loss of possibly Clemson and Florida State and somebody else possibly. So it couldn't be more of a messy situation, but it's hard to believe the Alliance played such a huge role in this. But we'll be watching it closely because a decision has to be made by August 15th as far as whether they'll be in the conference the following year. So definitely something's going to happen between now and August 15th, and it might still happen this month because there is a lot of talk of that. But if they don't announce leaving the ACC by August 15th, they're going to be in for the following year. At least we'll know that, which means they're going to stay until this lawsuit plays itself out. So anyway, that's an update on that. It's not the greatest update in the world, but it is what we know right now. So I did want to cover these 2 things. One of them I think is ridiculous. The horns down being a penalty is absurd. You know, unless somebody's just ridiculous with it and literally going down there and doing that in the guy's face after tackling him or something, you know, short of that, it should absolutely not be a penalty. And I'm shocked that there are people in Texas that want that. It is not the way to walk into this conference. It just isn't. And as far as FSU and Clemson, stay tuned. It's changing by the minute. But I just don't believe the Big 12 rumors at all. That makes no sense. And if you like this content, want to keep up with these types of big sports stories, hit this little button right over here. I would appreciate it. It doesn't cost you a dime and helps me out. And right over here is the most recent video YouTube thinks you'll enjoy. And we'll see you next time on Sports Talk Jay.